Like Langapoiva Jackson, many of today's reporters understand from personal experience that climate change affects all of us. They feel an urgency to share the science and the impacts and increasingly potential solutions.
I think reporting on climate has definitely opened my eyes, thinking about the connections between climate and other things.
Justin Worland is a senior correspondent at Time magazine and is covering Climate Now's Climate Journalist of the Year.
I've learned a lot about not just climate, but also about the world.
Justin does some of the best nitty-gritty reporting on climate change of anybody out there.
He writes about climate as it relates to business, as it relates to politics, as it relates to culture. He really does embody the sense that the climate story is every story.
To further strengthen climate coverage, Justin co-founded a network for journalists of color who cover environmental issues, the Uproot Project.
And so we came together in 2019 and thought about what are the ways in which we can help create a pathway for journalists of color to get involved with covering climate change and environmental issues. How do we change the conversation around climate and make it something that's not just about carbon in the atmosphere, but also about things that affect people's lives, including people of color and diverse communities. And so it's critically important for journalists to give that full picture, to say this is a really bad problem. We also have really good solutions. We just need to make sure we implement them. Because the story can't just be about problems. It can't just be about solutions, giving people false hope. It's got to be problem, solution, put those two together.
I think one of the really exciting parts of the climate story in the last year has been the increasing attention to solutions.
What we saw was a shift from the disaster narratives, the polar bears, melting glaciers, to really looking at, okay, what are we doing to address this issue? And psychologically, that's actually a really good shift for us to do in climate journalism, because it's frustrating, it's scary, they don't want to hear about it. But as we're shifting to solutions, I think people are getting more engaged.
It's not enough to tell people how bad it is. At this point, people kind of get that. And what often turns them off or paralyzes them is the sense that, there's nothing to be done about it. And in fact, the solutions are here.
When we say solutions journalism, we're not talking about good news. We're really talking about investigative journalism. It's just investigating and holding accountable the solutions that corporations, governments, and other stakeholders bring to this party. Because a lot of people have really great ideas on how to solve the issues around climate change. Not all of them are good, and not all of them are viable.
A good example? A Los Angeles Times investigation into extreme heat's deadly toll.
We really fixated on the fact that extreme heat is the deadliest consequence of global warming by far, killing more people than any other weather-related disaster. But we didn't feel like it got the attention that it deserved.
The team discovering that the state had commissioned a study over a decade ago, laying out solutions to avoid needless deaths.
It had a bit of a feeling of a government report that was gathering dust on the shelf. When we asked how many had been fulfilled, there was a lot that just had not moved forward. It's things that are relatively easy to do. Things like tracking and responding to the number of heat illnesses that are reported in hospitals. It's things like getting people to air-conditioned spaces when the risk is highest. These are things that will save people's lives and aren't necessarily being done.
Journalism can help in lots of different ways. It could help by pointing out the solutions that we have that aren't being implemented, where people are just, dragging their feet or not acting fast enough.
The team began crunching the data to decipher how many deaths of Californians could be attributed to extreme heat over the course of a decade. The official tally, 599.
And what we learned was that the true toll is likely 6 times higher than that 599 deaths. Closer to 4,000 people died in California from extreme heat over that period.
In that LA Times series, what was so effective is that they were both doing this data-driven analysis, and they were showing the individual person whose parent died because they couldn't get in contact with them, and that elderly parent was living in a home without air conditioning.
One thing I would say that a lot of those interviews had in common was a feeling of shame that I didn't do more to protect my father. I didn't do more to protect my sister.
Reporter Anna Phillips tracked down some of the stories of the invisible victims of extreme heat, like 70-year-old Ann Gakambi Methu.
She had Alzheimer's. She was in an assisted living facility in Riverside, California. It gets up to 118 degrees in Riverside. incredibly hot. Anne is allowed to leave the facility and to kind of walk around a courtyard, and she's out there for hours. I talked to her children almost a year after she died, and they were still, I think, in a state of shock. Anne had immigrated to the US from Kenya. Her children had followed her mostly, as adults. And I think the idea that you could come here and die from heat is a really difficult idea to kind of get your mind around.
What the data shows just about access to air conditioning, about heat illness and fatalities are that, yes, low-income communities, communities of color, particularly Black Californians and the elderly, are most at risk of heat illness and of dying from extreme heat.
After their reporting, California Governor Gavin Newsom and local authorities made new pledges of solutions.
We don't need new technologies. We have about 95% of the technologies we need with renewable energy, solar, wind, battery storage, especially energy efficiency. We have these solutions.
So two things are happening at once. We are advancing solutions. We are advancing this conversation, but it needs to happen faster than the warming.
I think that we have a focus on mitigation, which is, stopping sending carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and adaptation, which is figuring out, okay, how are we going to get people on the West Coast AC units who didn't have them before?
For younger journalists, exploring potential solutions is especially urgent.
I think we saw with the youth climate movement how much momentum there is among my generation, how much people in my generation understand the stakes and really want to act. There are lots of ways that people can make small decisions, and whether that's getting involved in an activist movement and holding your local leaders to account, or doing something personal like deciding to invest in a bike and not driving, or deciding to not fly for a year. I think all of those decisions matter, but paralysis doesn't lead us to any of those. There are a lot of smart people working on this. A lot of smart people have proposed a lot of good answers. We know what the answers are. I don't know if people are ready to make the hard decisions that get us to those answers. And that's people in power and kind of the everyday person.
Climate change presents a really interesting challenge for journalists, right? Journalists are meant to be dispassionate to some degree, are meant to check their personal biases at the door. But I think what's interesting about climate change is that it's okay to say, actually, I want the world to be a livable place.
What gives me hope is that more and more people seem to want this kind of coverage. People respond to that. When we do deeper, more substantive looks at technological solutions or impacts elsewhere in the world, people are interested and seemingly hungry for that.
It's not a story of despair. The bad news is it might happen, the worst, but it doesn't have to happen if we prepare ourselves. And we, the people, need to be the ones to prepare ourselves. Don't rely on our leaders to make the decisions for us.
This is one of the biggest challenges that humanity has ever faced, but it's also one of the most interesting challenges. There was a period of time where it looked like we weren't going to get clean energy to be cheap, and people just had no idea. I mean, how are we going to address this problem? Are we going to be in a situation where billions of people around the world are going to be facing really catastrophic situation? That's still possible, but it's less likely. And I think it's important that we tell that story as well.
There isn't, one thing that's really going to save us. It's about taking everything we know, all of the different tools in the toolbox, and using them to the best that we can. There's a lot that can be done and should be done.
So one of the most important things each of us can do about climate change is talking about it and the burning questions it raises. We got to talk with our families, our friends, our coworkers, and the more we know about the problem and its solutions, the more constructive our conversations will be.
Such a good point, and that's why good climate journalism is so essential. Only when we all understand what's at stake and how to fix it can we find a way forward together.
We want to thank you for watching.